The World Trade Organization has resumed negotiations on whether to waive intellectual property rights for COVID-19 vaccines. The push by India and South Africa is aimed at boosting vaccine production for poorer nations. More than 60 countries have backed the move, including the United States and China. But the World Bank and major vaccine makers have voiced a strong opposition. Mr. Hosuk Lee-Makiyama, director of the European Centre for International Political Economy, joins us for more on this. Firstly, help us understand the pros and cons of the waiver.
Well, if you're talking about pros and cons, it's very important to ask yourself the question, for whom? Because in the end, there's already safeguards and actually caveats in all international trade agreements to make sure that no vaccine shortage will be caused by intellectual property. There are already waivers in place to make that happen. What we are really discussing here is whether we really need additional waivers. And what South Africa and India is currently proposing is actually quite far-reaching exceptions for enforcement of all intellectual property, not just for patents for vaccine, but also general industrial patents for other goods, including electronics. We're also talking about industrial design for cars, because you can argue that you need cars in the pandemic to keep people safe. We are also even talking about copyright. So in theory, this waiver could be abused to kidnap the stream there where you and I are talking and release it on DVD and for profit in another country by someone who has no relation to neither you nor me. So we are looking at a pretty extensive waiver that may not be related to COVID at all.
Certainly, the issue of intellectual property rights is a multifaceted one, Mr. Lee-Makiyama, but how crucial is the WTO's role going to be in addressing the global shortage of vaccines? Do you think that this temporary waiver would actually help with efforts to end the pandemic?
Well, the truth is that most of the intellectual property fees have either been waived already by the pharmaceutical companies, or it has actually been significantly reduced by helpful governments who have actually offered to step in. Sure, there are certain occasions they could play a minor role, but the real truth here is that in all trade agreement, there are emergency clauses for situations like this, which basically means that governments can do whatever they want. They can compulsorily license medical patents already under existing rules. And interestingly, this is something that India is refusing to do, because its government officials have actually recognized in Indian press that actually the compulsory licensing of patents wouldn't actually achieve much in terms of access to medicines. So this is really just a question about whether you are in favor of intellectual property in general, or you want to get rid of an enforceable system for intellectual property on industrial patents.
So you don't see this as something that is specific to COVID-19 and making it equitable for people in various different countries?
Well, it seems like you should never waste a crisis, and this is certainly a way for India and South Africa and many other countries who have called for a loosening the enforcement of intellectual property within the World Trade Organization and other systems. And but the fact is that the current shortage is not necessarily caused by intellectual property, but actually constrained by other factors like technology or lack of production facility and raw material shortages that we have seen across the world. So this is not something that can be helped by a new trade agreement that would waiver these fees. What is basically missing now is compounds and equipment, and this will not be automatically generated by waivering intellectual property fees that are already waived. It doesn't necessarily add up.
And what to you are some of the supply chain issues that may hold back vaccine production?
Well, what we've seen so far is that even the modern facilities that we have, for example, in Singapore and Western Europe, have proven to be quite difficult to set up for COVID-19 vaccine production without extensive modification. This is something that Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca have all gone through. And also raw material shortages, both in terms of supply chain disruption, but also quality issues, chemical compounds, that are necessarily for making the mRNA vaccines have been extremely difficult to make at an acceptable standard of quality. And even simple things like single-use plastic bags that are used in vessels to make this mRNA has been extremely difficult to procure. And there is actually also a very, very fair point about hoarding. EU has secured 1 billion doses, which is, well, 2 for every person. And whereas United States, UK, Canada has bought enough to vaccinate everyone 3, 4, 5 times of their population. United States have basically deployed the Defense Production Act, and UK and other countries have utilized export authorization schemes to make sure that they have more vaccine that they need. So hoarding is actually really a factor here, and which would otherwise be available for developing countries across Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan and many other places that are currently without vaccines.
Mr. Lee-Makiyama, thank you for your thoughts. That was Mr. Hosuk Lee-Makiyama, Director of the European Centre for International Political Economy.